Chapter 2. Although not always obvious, there are reasons for our decisions. I, for example, became a mathematician because of my adoptive father. My biological father was killed in the atomic bombing of Nagasaki in August 9, 1945. I was spared only because I was yet in my mother's womb, and on that day she was visiting her parents far outside the city. After the war, the Americans came to study the results of the radiation, monitoring and testing the survivors over many years. My adoptive father was one of the doctors in that program. He became enamored of my mother, married her, and when he returned to the United States, we, of course, came with him. My love of numbers was born of his influence, and so I became a mathematician and studied arcane aspects of number theory. Others have come to a similar place through very different causes, and still others have, through very similar causes, ended up in very different places. Life is not quite so tidy as mathematics. Then again, many sequences start with the numbers 0 and 1. Very few continue with 2. Perhaps mathematics is less tidy than one might think. Or perhaps life is more so. The victim, Bess Williams, was a Caucasian female, 28 years old, a good Samaritan dropping off food donations at the Presbyterian Church across the street from Centennial Park when she was clobbered from behind. Stunned but not knocked unconscious, she was relieved of her cash, engagement ring, and a gold chain necklace set with her birthstone, amethyst. After her attacker left, she'd been lucid enough to call 911 on her cell phone. Having arrived at the crime scene just after Williams was taken to the hospital, Peller and Montefar quickly noticed that there was little to notice. The parking lot had been plowed, although 4 or 5 parking places remained half buried, and a path shoveled to the main door of the church. Half a dozen plastic grocery bags filled with canned goods sat near the door, while 3 more with contents spilling out lay behind the trunk of Williams' blue Volvo, which was parked parallel to the building near the door. She had apparently been attacked while removing the bags from the trunk. No blood was in evidence. One of the officers at the scene informed the detectives that Williams had been wearing a thick hat. And she had seen the golf club. A Wilson 9-iron resting on the ground beside her, while the attacker, standing over her prone body, rummaged through her purse. "I'll talk to her," Montefar said. "You should look around some more. Something's odd about this attack." "As opposed to the previous ones?" She gave Peller a sidelong glance, lips pinched tight. He shrugged and shuffled toward the pile of bags by the door. Behind him, he heard Montefar slam the car door and drive off with a squeal of tires. Peller turned up his collar against the cold. The temperature was in the high 20s, and the air still, not bad compared to what he was used to, but he was finding cold weather increasingly unpleasant. Must be getting old, he told himself. Although he wasn't sure that at 46 he was quite ready to think of himself as old. As the crime scene unit finished work and its members departed, the parking lot grew quiet. The persistent rush of traffic in the distance scarcely registered as he let his eyes play over the area. The church, the bags of food, the car, the winter bare trees, the snow gently blanketing the yard and piled into Himalayan foothills at the edge of the parking lot. Montefar was right. Something was odd about the scene. And he knew what it was. "Hey, Scott," he called to the photographer who was loading his equipment into the trunk of his car. With a gesture, Peller indicated the entrance to the parking lot. "Did you notice anything over there?" Squinting into the snow-reflected light, Scott saw pondered for a bit, his dark features pulled into a look of concentration. Zan's parents were from Turkey. He had been born in the U.S., but his given name wasn't Scott. Peller didn't know what it was, only that Scott had grown tired of people butchering it and had settled on Scott as something Americans could get right most of the time. No, but I see what you mean. There's no sign of anyone entering the parking lot from any other direction, so the attacker must have come in that way. And he didn't drive in, Peller said, or the victim would have heard the car and looked to see who it was. Maybe there are some footprints near the road. They headed that direction, scanning the ground as they went. The emergency vehicles had churned the snow into slush, and there was no indication that any walker had passed that way. The road showed only tire ruts. The road itself was a long lane that led onto the church grounds, lined on one side with tall pines burdened with wet snow, and on the other with small trees and bushes half buried in plowed-up piles. It would have been easy for someone to walk in unobserved. The lane extended beyond the parking lot towards a second building behind the church. Peller walked it, and about 200 feet along found another parking lot entrance flanked by a pair of bare trees. There, as though a car had parked under the leftmost tree, he spotted a set of depressions in the snow. Alongside them he found a single footprint, somewhat smeared. He motioned to Sayin, who took one look and then returned to retrieve his equipment. As Peller waited, his cell phone went off. "You got another Peller letter, Rick," a deep, vaguely scratchy voice told him. The voice belonged to Detective Sergeant Eric Dumas, Peller's second closest associate after Montefiore. Montefiore and Dumas were his protégés after a fashion, officially under his command, but in Peller's eyes, equal to himself as team members. "What's the name on the return address?" Peller asked. "Leon F. Pisano. Another variation on the theme. This one sounds like a lawyer. Have you opened it?" Dumas rattled the paper. "Yep, it says, and I quote, 'a firstborn son.' Not very informative. And not in keeping with the pattern. We were expecting something about 2. So he's not just a lunatic, he's a lunatic that can't count." Peller stared at the lone footprint in the snow, puzzled. "I don't think so. Something else is going on here." "If you say so. All I know is it's going to be a challenge protecting all the firstborn sons in the county. The hospital door closed behind Montefiore. She took a deep breath of the cool, antiseptic air to calm herself, and immediately regretted it. Montefiore hated hospitals, the code announcements, the white lab coats and hypocritically cheerful scrubs, the air itself. All of it reminded her painfully of her mother's long dying. She wondered why she had volunteered to talk to Bess Williams, but she also realized that the woman would probably be more comfortable talking to her than one of the male detectives. And Peller's keen eye was needed at the crime scene in any case. So she did her best to shut out her surroundings and concentrate on her job. Mama would have told me to pray. Mama would have told me to ask the Blessed Virgin for strength. Mama was dead. Montefiore located the bed where Williams was being treated. A nurse just leaving had pulled the curtain around. Montefiore nudged it open far enough to look in. Her head bandaged, Williams rested in the half-raised bed, nursing a cup of water and gazing blankly at the top of the curtain. Her shoulder-length dark hair spilled haphazardly around her slender face. The sheet was bunched around her waist. Bess? Williams lowered her eyes to look, but said nothing. I'm Karina Montefar. I'm a detective with the Howard County Police. May I come in? Beckoned by a half-hearted wave of the hand, she stepped in and pulled the curtain shut again. How are you doing? Are they treating you well? Okay, I guess. It doesn't hurt much anymore. Montefar pulled a chair over and sat. We're doing everything we can to find out who did this to you. I know you probably don't feel much like talking, but if it's all right with you, I'd like to ask you a few things. I didn't see much, Williams said. He came up behind me. I didn't even know he was there. You didn't hear anything? She shook her head slowly, took a sip of water. I guess I was focused on what I was doing. You were delivering food donations. Yeah, the church collects for the food bank year-round. She laughed, although Montefar thought it sounded forced. My dad always says no good deed goes unpunished. I guess he's right. But you did see something, at least a little bit of something. It's a bit fuzzy. I thought something had fallen on me, maybe a tree branch. Maybe the snow broke a branch and it fell on me. I was lying on the ground, and then this golf club was there, lying in front of my face. That's when I knew what was happening. I'd heard about the other attacks on the news, you know. Montefar nodded. He was tugging at my hand. I played dead. That's what you're supposed to do, right? Make them think they got you? How long were you there? Montefar asked. I don't know, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10. He didn't rush. He took my necklace and... Williams looked away, choked up. Montefar waited patiently. After another sip of water, she continued, and my engagement ring. I don't know which is worse. My grandmother gave me that necklace. Her eyes drifted back to Montefar. And my cash, which at least wasn't much, only about $50, I think. Did you know when he was gone? She nodded. He picked up the golf club and walked away. Casually, like he was on the course. He was whistling. Did you see him? Can you describe him? Height, weight, clothing? Not really. I was too scared to move, and my head hurt like crazy. But eventually I peeked. He was almost to the road by then, and I don't think I was seeing too clearly. I only remember a sort of grayish blur in the shape of a man. I'd say... Williams put a hand to her forehead, as though taking her own temperature. I don't know, medium height, I guess, but I could be wrong. Montefar nodded. One last thing. I understand you had a pretty good look at the golf club. Yeah, that I could see. It was a Wilson 9-iron, but it looked short. Montefar had no idea if golf clubs came in different lengths. She supposed they must, probably to accommodate players of different heights. No, not just short, Williams sounded surprised. It was actually cut off. I remember now. Like somebody cut it off. It only had about half a handle. A sawed-off golf club? Montefar laughed, then quickly added. Sorry, it's not funny, I don't suppose. Williams smiled weakly. Well, maybe put that way it is.